cultivating operational resilience through people, process, and technology, and rehabilitating your reputation after a security setback. That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire.
Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire.
All right, welcome friends to episode number 20 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York, and joining me today, 13 time zones away in Japan, is my co-host and partner in cybercrime, Ryan Morris, principal consultant with Morris Management Partners. Ryan, let me just start off by asking you a question since you do so much overseas traveling. I think the longest flight I ever had was maybe about 10 and a half hours or so. So I want some advice from you. How do you pass the time on a really long flight so you don't go insane?
Well, see, that's the thing, right? A, you try real hard to pass the time, and B, you're probably actually also going to go insane. It doesn't matter how many movies you watch, how many podcasts you listen to, how much you read, how many spreadsheets you work on the computer. At about 10 hours, literally, there comes a point where you look around and go, are we landed? Are we there yet? No, we're not. This one, we were from Frankfurt over the top of the globe down into Tokyo, Japan. All in, it was about 15 hours. And I will tell you, I got to the point where my ears hurt so bad from wearing my headphones that I had to just go old school and read an actual book, like an actual hard copy book that I had with me. That one got me through until I could, fall asleep and be delirious before I got off the plane.
All right. Well, I was hoping maybe you'd have some kind of magic formula for me, but I guess there is no magic formula. You just kind of have to, deal with it and cope however you can. So fair enough.
You do what you can. And what I will say is, being 6'2" and a reasonably large size individual in this world makes it all that much more difficult when I look around the airplane and I see all the folks that are 5'2" coming back to Japan. I look at them with great envy because even an economy plus seat that reclines, like this far, that's still actually quite comfortable for somebody that size. But when you put the extra large size human in that chair, there is no comfortable position.
Yeah, well, a lot of those airlines, they certainly do pack you in like sardines, and comfort isn't top of their mind. But I guess that's just the perils of traveling overseas. All right, plenty to cover today, as always, but some news just can't wait, which is why we want to share with everyone what's top of mind today. So here's your headline. The German IT services company Bitmark, a big tech player in the healthcare and health insurance sector, shut down its customer and internal systems and its Munich data center following a late April cyber attack. As part of its recovery plan, the company has been methodically and gradually bringing its systems back online based on priority-oriented procedures that take into account individual customer situations and the respective operating center that they rely on. About 35 health insurance companies also taking advantage of an interim solution that Bitmark has propped up, allowing them for the disbursement of sick pay and other payments directly, and allowing them to carry out other critical orders, all in a secure environment. But Bitmark is still warning there'll be some road bumps along the way, noting that the restarting of individual services will bring with it renewed temporary service flaws. So, at the very least, it seems like customer and patient data was not affected, apparently. Ryan, why is this top of mind for you?
See, I can think of three things that made this one jump right to the top of the stack. Number one, critical failures happen. A lot of people in the world of cybersecurity and data protection, business continuity, we like to talk about that as though it is It's a philosophical kind of a debate, right? You'll get into this with some clients where they're like, well, in the hypothetical, when we might be out, how long would it take for us to get back in to full business operation? And we talk about things like recovery point objective and recovery time objective. And hey, we're techies, so we even have fancy little acronyms for those things. Um, it's all just an academic exercise until something legit happens. And you made the key point as you were introducing this story. They went down in late April. As of the first week of May, they're still down. That's not kidding. I would say from an old data nerd's perspective in this industry, the one thing that we don't do often enough is real time practice for actual severe interruption of service. We often talk to people and we say, well, hey, how resilient are your systems? And do you have a business continuity plan? And how soon would you be able to get back online? And everybody's got data. Everybody's got a plan. It's going to take this long. It'll bring these systems back up and then those systems back up. To which a very wise person once taught me that the best question you can ask right after that is, so how do you know? Like, it'll take me 2 days to get back online. How do you know? Well, because that's the way we've scripted it. Cool. You know that old Mike Tyson quote? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. These kinds of things happen, and it will take people outside of their philosophical operational boundaries. And my very first reaction to this story was we need some very sincere, significant, like real time exercises. Don't just do this philosophically. Your data continuity and your business continuity plan needs to be tested in real time with the risk of things actually going offline. The second thing that made this one jump up to the top of mind for me is this is not even the first time in the last 2 weeks that you and I have talked about severe interruptions of critical operating systems in the healthcare field. That trend is accelerating. All the data that we see is, it's not just financial services, it's not just manufacturing, but healthcare systems. That might be the most intimate, personally identifiable information that we deal with our customers. And that stuff is in the crosshairs. People are coming for it. And this is yet again another example of it's not like a little mom and pop health records company that manages a few things. Hey, we got some patients that drop by the office once a year and get a regular checkup. These are hundreds of thousands of records and customers and employees who are out of their operating comfort zone simply because of this downturn. So just because you're big does not mean that you are protected from all of these things. It is possible to knock these big companies down. The third thing that really came to mind is the point that you closed with in the introduction. Even though they are coming back online, they are standing back up old fashioned versions of their services, and they anticipate that there will be basic operational interruptions in those new services as they spin them back up. We spend years fine tuning our operating systems, our applications, our databases, all the workflow, everything that we use in this business world. We put all the work into making that stuff better. And you look back and you say, can you imagine going back to the way things were 2 years ago? Like, wow, how would you even survive? Well, the answer is you and unfortunately others in the industry are about to find out what it's like to go in the DeLorean back in time and go back to operating in the bad old days. That is the bottom line that we're seeing with a lot of companies in severe cyber interruptions when actual business systems go down. Their answer is, well, we're going to go back and operate like it's 2018. And maybe we know what we're doing and maybe we don't. I would argue most companies legitimately don't have a plan for a massive disruption like that. It's time for all managed security service providers to step up, not just the real-time services that you provide, not just the preemptive services, but the potential for disaster recovery and business continuity. A lot of people don't think of backup and recovery as a security protocol. I'm here to tell you, no matter what else you do in cybersecurity, the baseline of everything we do is backup. So let's test those things.
All right, Ryan, very good. We'll certainly keep an eye on this particular story and see if there are any other future developments worth covering. And certainly we want to hear from you if you have any thoughts on this or anything else in our show. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com. Anyway, that's going to be our top of mind hot take for the day. There'll be more news later in the show. But first, it's time for our featured InfoSec strategy topic of the week, presenting our big idea in security: cultivating operational resilience through people, process, and technology. Now, due to a scheduling conflict, I recorded this segment with our guest expert at an earlier time. So please enjoy the following interview that we're about to play for you, and Ryan will be rejoining me for the second half of the show. What's the best way to ensure operational resilience against cybercriminals' tactics, techniques, and procedures? Well, just rearrange the letters in TTP and you get PPT, People, Process, and Technology. This session will examine how organizations can score, benchmark, and improve their cyber resilience through a combination of security processes, proper cyber hygiene and employee behavior, and a robust technology infrastructure. To do it right, all three elements need to be in place. To discuss this further, we'd like to welcome in our guest speaker, Pete Bowers, COO at the UK-based managed security services firm Norm, where he is responsible for the overall operational and financial functions of the business. Pete also oversees customer innovation and success and plays a pivotal role in the ongoing development of cybersecurity and data protection services for Norm's growing client base. His previous roles include director at Confido and CIO of Interroute. Pete, thanks very much for being here today. Glad that you could join us. And as always, we're going to jump right into things. In the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority recently ushered in new operational resiliency rules for financial organizations. That happened last year. Meanwhile, in the US, the SEC just recently proposed some new rules, which include requiring organizations under its authority to include third-party providers when conducting their business continuity and disaster recovery testing. So as much as we often think of regulations as they pertain to data privacy and notification after a breach, it does seem like maybe there's been a growing emphasis on the notion of post-attack resilience and recovery. I'm wondering if you agree with that and would make that same observation.
Hi, Bradley. Firstly, thanks very much for having me today. Great to be here and talking to you. Yeah, I think you're right. Regulation is increasing, and the simple reason why regulation is increasing both in the US, the UK, and beyond is because of the increased amount of cyber attacks and cyber threats that are out there. And governments, regulators realize that they've got to do more to try and stimulate industry and organizations to try and put in the right measures, both pre-attack and post-attack, to be able to recover from such an incident. And if you look at the operational resilience regulations that came into play at the end of March last year, 31st of March 22, they are focused on making sure organizations, particularly those within the financial sector governed by the FCA, have robust plans in place to deliver their essential services, no matter what the disruption. So operational resilience typically is related to operational elements of making sure they can deliver their services, but key to that is cyber resilience. And what plans in place do those businesses and those organizations have in place to respond and make sure they're inherently resilient should quite often the inevitable happen.
Absolutely. So I know that you want to kind of take us through these three key elements that are all important to operational resilience, looking at resilience and how to do it right from a people, process, and technology perspective. So let's break up this interview segment into those three elements and hear some of your observations and recommendations for best practices among all three of those. So I believe in this particular case, you'd like to start with the processes. So let's do that first and talk a little bit there about what you would identify as some of the key best practices that organizations should be following.
Yeah, certainly. I think when you look at how to make a business cyber resilient, which, as we talked about, feeds into operational resilience, typically there's no silver bullet. And so simply looking at incident response plans or business continuity plans or information security plans, or even buying product and services to satisfy technology challenges are never really going to be suitable and acceptable, both for the regulator and actually to protect that organization and make sure that business is resilient. So the way to look at this, and if you look at the way regulators will expect businesses and organizations to do it, the way insurers will expect you to do it, the way your customers expect you to do it, is make sure you as an organization are cyber resilient. And to do that, we look at it in the sense that you have to address those three angles of processes, people, and technology. So from a processes perspective, what I call is the foundation of your cyber resilience plan is what actually is your cyber resilience plan? Are you doing the basics right? Have you got the right policies in place, the right processes in place, both in terms of how you process data, how you handle your confidential assets within the business, and also those technology processes. What do you do when you onboard a new starter? What do you do when you offboard a starter? And those typical information security policies and processes that we see within the industry. In the UK, we have a national cybersecurity standard called Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, which was really the foundation for any business to be able to undertake, to be able to go and project to the outside world that they've got the basics in place. And then, of course, the international standard from an information security perspective is ISO 27001. And that takes a much more risk-based approach and allows organizations to really understand the risk within their business, understand the controls they want to apply, and then apply those controls based upon the risk. And that can be different for every single organization. But if you start at that position of getting your processes right, you give yourself a foundation. But that alone, without doing other elements, isn't going to secure an organization or ability. It's not going to make you resilient. It will have things written down, but it's key to test those, and it's key to constantly evaluate those processes. The next level in the stack, if you like, in terms of making your business resilient, is looking at how an attacker can potentially infiltrate your business. Well, that's typically through your people. We often hear people being called the human firewall, or we also call them the weak link, and every element in between. But people are key to your business. People help your business work. People actually are your business, and therefore they're an easy target sometimes. Quite often people are busy, they're occupied, they've got lots of tasks to do, and particularly if we look at the current state of the macroeconomy across the globe at the moment, there are challenges in certain sectors of industry in terms of layoffs. And so therefore you create disruption within that people environment, and you want to make sure that those people understand their obligations in terms of protecting your business. So typically in the past, some businesses, some organizations will do induction training for security awareness. They will do a once a year PowerPoint presentation, and really that's been proven over the past few years to be insufficient. You have to train your people, you have to educate your people on a constant basis. That's either serving them through easy to consume content, whether they're at home, making it relevant in terms of their personal work life. Since the pandemic that we all experienced, that work-life mix has become even more blurred. People don't go to the office and then come home and switch off anymore. It is work life is now completely intertwined, and the devices we use and where we actually use them from. So making sure that people are aware of their surroundings, making sure that people are aware of their obligation to protect business data and their employees' data as much as they protect their own personal data, such as their bank information, is really quite important. And that you just got to try and keep that front of mind so that they're constantly thinking about it. Every time an email comes in, do I click on this link? It just needs to be front of mind. And there's various tools and platforms that allow you to do that. And then it's trying to get an insight of how those tools are working. So if you, in the old days, if you go and present a annual PowerPoint presentation or watch people make a video, you typically would have taken a list of who attended, but you don't know actually who understood and who digested and who comprehended that content. And so by testing that on an ongoing basis, both through simple assessment tests, simple confidence tests, or simulated phishing, which lots of people do now as part of security awareness engagement, to make sure you really understand within your organization who are the people who really do get this and it's front of mind, and who really could do with some more assistance in terms of further education or further understanding. Because I think there was a recent survey towards the back end of 2022, and it's a pretty common number that comes around 80-85% of attacks on businesses are typically done through people. It's through leveraging phishing or attacking senior people within the organization, known as whaling. Not a great term, but in terms of trying to exploit that human factor and trying to infiltrate a business that way, it's still very common.
Yeah,
because it's quite easy to do.
Yeah, and absolutely. And Pete, for those who may be listening as well and saying, anti phishing training is obviously a very important security awareness tool, certainly from a preventative measure, but, how does it also impact my resilience? Well, I think we talked about this a little bit, and the answer to that is that while sure, the training is also meant to stave off attacks in advance, the training should also cover scenarios of if that phishing email actually gets through into your inbox, how to properly dispose of it, who you're supposed to alert within your organization, if an attack does perhaps reach an additional stage, how to conduct a response there. So really, it is as much about the response as it is also about preventing the phishing attack from proceeding further as well. It's really it covers both sides of the equation.
Absolutely, Bradley. For sure, a comprehensive awareness program, if you like, educates the individuals both from the preventative side and both from the reaction side, because it's so prevalent. As I mentioned before, most attacks are through that way. So it's important to train your user and your employees not to panic, to think clearly, think precisely in terms of what to do from when that happens. And similarly, training can go beyond just the whole employee base. You may target training specifically at different functions within the business. So part of the training may be training around incident response. So what happens if this scenarios happen? How do we manage it? How do we inform our stakeholders? How do we inform our customers? How do we inform regulators if there's how do we identify if a personal information breach has occurred and we have to inform the regulator across Europe in terms of the GDPR? All that training is really key so that your organization and those people working within it are as prepared as they possibly can be for what is becoming the inevitable.
And I think we saw too, and even the way that you started to present, talking about some of the key processes that you need to have instituted in your organization for resilience, you so smoothly segued right into the second leg of this triangle, which is people. And that just shows how much overlap there actually is between people, process, and technology. There is a lot of overlap there. And so certainly part of that training as well, and getting your workforce up to speed, is also training them on the processes and controls that you as an organization want to implement. And so I know that we had talked about even in our last discussion in prepping for this call that that can include really a mix of both technical measures and then organizational measures like various governance policies. And so, maybe you can also, if we can rewind a little bit and talk a little bit more about the process and how it interplays with the people aspect of things as well. How do you make sure that your various policies are properly being followed and enforced, and that the technical measures you've implemented are being properly used?
Well, I think the way organisations can do that quite easily is if they adopt a framework and they adopt a standard to follow as best practice. So I mentioned in the UK Cyber Essentials, the international one's ISO 27001, of course. That has a very comprehensive set of controls within the framework. If a business, if a business adopts a framework like that, it can then go out and get external certification and get external audit to validate those controls are working in the first instance. And that allows you then to go and demonstrate to your stakeholders that you are doing those basics right, you have got them in place. An auditor will come along and test a sample of the controls that you've put in place, but they could be the response capabilities in terms of business continuity plan, they could be the preventative controls you've put in place, they could be how effective the staff training is working, and they will look at a sample. I think one of the key things from the operational resilience guidelines, both from the SEC and the FCA in the UK, is making sure the board understands the resilience of the organisation and the risk within the organisation. So at a 27001 level, you have a risk assessment of an information security perspective. But if you're deploying the three elements that we talk about, processes, people, technology, you should be able to measure how each one of those individual components are working and therefore contributing to your overall cyber resilience, as we call it in Norm. But I think each of those you mentioned about them overlapping is really key. And I think where that demonstrates itself best is simply in the Annex A controls within ISO 27001. You have people-focused controls, you have preventative controls, you have reactive controls, and you have technology controls. And those combined, when they're working together, give you a good chance of protecting your business, but also being able to respond to it. And I think on the resilience side of it and the response side of it, the insurance market is a very good place to follow from a vantage perspective. Is if you look at the way insurance policies for cyber are being written now, they're as much about having the preventative controls in place as they are about actually being able to respond to an incident, i.e., how can we stop the losses as quick as possible? How can we get the business back up and running? And so the two are working very much hand in hand, those preventative pieces and the reactive pieces. And I think when you come into the technology side of it, where we talked about processes, people, technology, the right technical controls are proactive, preventative, and reactive, the resilient element of it. And if on a proactive side of the preventative element, it is understanding where your technical risk lies within the business. So do you understand all the devices that are connected to your environment? Do you understand where they are? Do you understand who's got them? Do you understand what vulnerabilities they have on them? Do you understand what they're doing within your organization? And then making sure that you are patching those devices, making sure that you're configuring them correctly and that they are secure inherently. And that changes constantly. That changes on an hourly, daily basis as new vulnerabilities are discovered. And then the reactive side of that is, okay, if we've got the processes in place, we've got our people trained, we've got our vulnerabilities understood, what do we do if an attack happens? How do we firstly detect it? How do we identify that there's suspicious activity going on across the organization, whether that's on a device, on a user account in Office 365, on a network or in a cloud environment? What does malicious activity look like? How do we detect it and filter it out from the noise? And then how do we respond to it? Do we isolate the environment? Do we shut the port down? Do we block an IP address? Do we isolate the device? Has it propagated out into the wider environment? And therefore, do we need to contain a specific subnet or a network? How do we respond to that? And having those playbooks in place, having those response plans in place and testing them is really, really key.
Absolutely. And, one of the, again, this really involves people, process, and technology, all three of these things. Can you talk a little bit about how having a business continuity or disaster recovery plan requires all three of these elements that we just discussed as well? Because it's really everything from having the technology and the systems needed to be able to properly restore any of the systems that were affected, and to basically to take advantage of any backups or redundancies that you might have. And at the same time, from a process and people perspective, you have to, train people how to deal with downtime situations. You have to have processes in place for basically, this is kind of our emergency protocols for right now. Our website is down, or we're a hospital and we can't actively accept patients right now. We might have to divert them. There's really elements of people, process, and technology to all three aspects of a business continuity and disaster recovery while in mid-crisis and managing that. I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, Bradley. I think, and it all comes down to the planning of that business continuity plan. It's all a disaster recovery plan. If you started at that foundation level I talked about, where I see processes is actually what are our key systems, what are our key services we need to deliver, how long can we live without them? So if we lost them, and typically, again, going back in the day of spending my first part of my career on the customer side, if you like, to where we work now, and worry about business continuity plans in it, running a technology function within various different industries. You typically looked at what were the physical events that could happen. You looked at what would happen if a plane landed on a building. What happens if we have snow or tornadoes or bad weather? And then you loosely talk about, well, what happened if the technology environment just stopped, when servers packed up or data centers weren't available or internet connections typically went down. Now business continuity plans have got to evolve around cyber, because in reality, we don't see planes dropping on buildings every day of the week. We can live with inclement weather. Our internet connections have got a lot more resilient. Our data centers have got a lot more resilient. The technology's got a lot more resilient. One of the biggest risks now is actually cyber. And so in those planning and those continuity plans, it's considering what could happen from a cyber perspective, and what is the outage that I can tolerate. So the same outage conversation, but actually what can I tolerate? So making sure you understand those in the first instance. And so that process element is, okay, what are the services I need to provide? And if they do go down, what are the processes to keep those services running? So if you take your medical example, well, if I haven't got systems and technology services in place in a hospital, what other services can we provide? Can we still provide triage? Can we still provide outpatient care? Can we go to paper-based? So understanding all those processes and the resilience capability and keeping services going is really key from a process perspective. Then, of course, overlaid on top of that is your people piece. Well, actually, if something happens, who needs to be involved? What's the team? What's the crash team? If we talk about the medical environment again, what is that emergency team I need on board to help keep the continuity going, keep the services running, but also outside of that, who do I need to inform? Which people need to understand the business continuity plan, and then which people need to be told that something is in place? And that, depending on the industry, can be an internal group within your organization. If you're a public-facing business, you're a consumer business, you, of course, have to tell your customers, you have to tell your news outlets, and make sure that communication is managed. And then on the technology side is really the disaster recovery piece, is making sure on the preventative side, you've got the right backups in place. You're testing those backups. You understand if I lost all my data, worst case scenario, how long would it take to restore that, and making sure that in the event of a cyber incident, actually from an incident response perspective, have I made sure the bad guys are out? So am I restoring a backup that actually has been infected? So I'm just overlaying problems after problems. And quite often you see customers, when they come to us from an incident response perspective, is they think they've got the bad guys out, they've restored it, but they're still in there. And it's the tools and technology put in around that to start isolating that environment and start cleaning it up and getting it back online.
Yeah. Pete, from your own experience and observations, taking this from a managed security services provider point of view, where typically are organizations most in need of help from their managed services provider? The people area, the process area, the technology area? Is there one that customers, clientele typically tend to be a little bit weaker at than the others that they need reinforcement in?
I think it depends on the industry, and it depends on the geography as well. I think certain businesses that are what I call technology led, in terms of the foundation of their business is through technology. So they may be an e-commerce platform, or they may be a SaaS platform. They inherently understand technology, so they inherently have relatively good technology controls in place, and their people and processes aren't particularly robust. If you switch that to manufacturing industries, they're typically traditional IT environments, because IT is there just to support the information workers within the business and some of the production plants, but there's an IT/OT crossover, and so quite often their technology controls are in place, are sometimes inadequate. But actually, what we see the most, and the majority of organizations we speak to, is that people are doing elements in terms of addressing cyber risk, but they're not doing enough in terms of that holistic approach across processes, people, technology, and therefore they don't have a really good insight as to what their cyber risk is. They assume that because they bought this product or this tool, then they're safe, or because they've got 27001, then they're safe. You know, we run red team penetration testing exercises within our business. We pen test 27001 organizations, and in reality, if they're not doing the other elements, they're as easy to get into as somebody who hasn't. So it's really important to keep all those three elements working and have that visibility of what the actual cyber resilience or cyber risk is within the business.
Understood, Pete. Well, you bring up the notion of risk, and that it can be difficult for some organizations to truly assess risk correctly. What's something that truly represents a grave threat to them, and what in particular they need to shore up their response to, so that they can be resilient. And that really offers us a nice opportunity to transition here to talk a little bit more about what you particularly find to be among the most serious threats out here in the cyber world. As we know, and we've mentioned before in previous episodes, the cybersecurity community is full of Chicken Littles out there that are constantly warning us that the sky is falling, when in reality, some threats are a little bit more over-exaggerated, or maybe a little bit more down the road, and some are more prevalent and important to address right away. There are times where the danger is very real. And I want you to try to help us identify which among the threats that are out there today are the ones that are very real. So with that, I would say let's all gather around the campfire and hear from our expert Pete today for a little scary story on what keeps him up at night, what gets his spidey senses tingling. And so with that, we're going to do a little segment that we like to call What Scares You? So Pete, having given you this little bit of an intro here on what we're looking for, I now turn to you and ask you, Pete, what scares you?
Well, in the business that I run today, the biggest thing that scares me is our customers suffering an attack. And you mentioned people often ask, what's the biggest threat out there? The reality is there is a threat out there. Will it get everybody tomorrow? No. We talk about the war in Ukraine. We talk about layoffs and disgruntled staff. We talk about specific vulnerabilities in terms of Log4j last year, Exchange vulnerabilities, which get big headlines and big alerts. But the simple fact of the matter is there is a threat out there, and we see that every day on the news. So what we try and do, and what we're constantly talking about, is making sure businesses are prepared for that threat. And if businesses are prepared for that threat, then whilst it's never nice when you see a potential customer suffer a breach, there's some comfort in the sense that actually you can respond to it really quickly. If you think about organizations, and this is the majority of organizations out there, aren't putting adequate controls in place, aren't addressing it holistically, and therefore they don't always know if an attack has happened, and typically it'll manifest itself days, months after the attack has first been in there. Those are going to compare that to those organizations that have put the adequate controls in place. Whilst it keeps us awake at night, there's a bit of comfort that you've got a team behind you, you've got people responding to it and isolating that and building your resilience up as soon as possible. But yes, it's you have a lot of responsibility in this industry, and so you sleep, but it's one of the things that you do worry about.
Yeah, well, I guess one aspect of that then is if the concern is about, what the fate of your customer should a cyber attack strike them, is making sure that if you are partnering with them, that they're taking your recommendations seriously, right? Like I'm sure at times one of the challenges of any managed services provider is the idea that the client may not always take every recommendation as seriously or as expediently as you would like them to, and maybe with bringing it back to the whole concept of people, process, and technology, that maybe they're not emphasizing some of these best practices that you're espousing. So how do you try to drive home those points to your customers and make sure that they are taking your advice seriously? What would be like your best advice for how to make sure that you are really getting through to them?
Yeah, so I think it's all about. There's a lot of organizations are complex, particularly though some of our customers are geographically dispersed throughout the world. So they've got complex environments. In the current world we live in, some of those environments are on-premise, some of those environments are in the public cloud, but most of them are somewhere in between. And so that makes quite a complex environment to understand. And their people are distributed at home, in coffee shops, in offices, and traveling around just as much as we did. But and so I think one of the things that we think is important is making sure within all that noise, you start to focus on what are the key things that you can improve and improve over time, and try and prioritize those improvements. So within the managed service that we offer, our service called Smart Block, every month we produce a report that has those highlights in terms of what you should be doing across people, process, and technology, and where we think the key risks are, correlated with what the most emerging threats are. And we also provide a focal analyst, as we call it, which is a senior SOC analyst, which is assigned to a customer, that talks that customer through in terms of what they really should be doing on a monthly basis, so that both parties understand and are working together to increase that cyber resilience within the business and increase that preparedness, and both preventative and reactive, and making sure that actually we are doing everything we possibly can to make you safer than the next guy along the street.
All right, Pete, thanks very much. Really appreciate all the thoughts and insight on this very important topic. Glad you could share with us some key best practices around people, process, and technology. With that said, we're out of time, so that's going to wrap up the first half of our show. Please return for part 2 of our episode. My co-host Ryan Morris will be back, and we will be tackling our big idea in business, which is all about recovering and rehabilitating your reputation following a damaging incident or a bad customer review. That plus our InfoSec News Rundown and our Dear Cyber for Hire Advice column segment, all coming up shortly, so we'll see you in a moment on the other side.